Okay.
I think it's best to start to stream out now. Just gonna give it a second.
And definitely don't feel like you have to like reserve your language or anything like that, because now we're recording or going live.
Yeah, we're all friends here.
Okay.
Right. We are live. All right, welcome to this very special October Open Signal Labs presents. I'm Jeff Oliver, and I just want to throw it over to Afani Bell, executive producer, for a quick intro.
How's it going, everybody? Ifani Bell. I am the EP of Open Signal Labs. Just want to give a quick overview of what Open Signal Labs is. Basically, it started in, what year was it? 2017, 2018, with a program that was designed to support filmmakers here locally in Portland in realizing their storytelling aspirations and establishing career pathways for Black creative people to work in the world of film and television. That pilot year was a really successful year, and so we pushed forward and started the second year in February, I guess it was, just before all the COVID stuff happened. So we have 6 new sort of first year, second year fellows who are working, right now diligently in developing stories, working on scripts, coming up with ideas, and COVID willing, we'll push those projects and stories into production, as soon as we possibly can, as soon as it makes perfect sense. But so Open Signal Labs and the Black Filmmaker Fellowship was the sort of first project of Open Signal Labs, whereas in the future we may look into different types of storytelling, focusing on XR and VR, theater, all different types of expression for that is available for Black creative people to participate in. So just a little bit of background on Open Signal Labs. Open Signal in general, the larger organization, was formerly a public access station, which is now transformed into a sort of media arts center, which houses other programs outside of Open Signal Labs that serve the community here in Portland through an equity lens. But that's just about it for me. I'm a filmmaker in my own right. I'm currently working on a couple of different documentaries. I love writing. I love film. In terms of horror, like my introduction to horror was back in like the Hellraiser days. That was kind of what introduced me to that genre. I was never really familiar with sort of Black people in horror, aside from the Black characters who are killed off very early on. Like that was just what I always knew, even as a child growing up. So I'm really excited to hear from Xavier with his, the documentary was outstanding, horror noir. But yeah, really excited to have you here, and I'll pass it on to Rashonda to tell you a little bit about who she is.
Hi, I'm Rashonda Brooks. I am the project coordinator for Open Signal Labs, and it's just been really a pleasure to work with these different Black creatives, this fellow specifically, in helping them and seeing them craft their work and their art in the ways that, are available to how they see it. And Open Signal Labs has just been a really great experience working alongside Ifani Bell and Jeff. And today, yes, it's definitely going to be a special treat to talk to Xavier about Black horror and other projects that he is working on. Horror is something that I've kind of been into and then also kind of distanced myself from, because sometimes creativity just goes different ways, and so do you. So anyways, I will pass it back to Jeff, and that's it.
So yeah, I am Jeff Oliver. I am the production manager here at Open Signal Labs, and I am the resident horror blurred. Like it's that's my stuff. So I'm super excited to welcome Xavier Burgin here, director of horror noir. If you haven't seen it, like go out and watch it, especially this season. It is not only just a fascinating and well done documentary, but I just rewatched it, I think for the 3rd time, and like it's just deep. I actually have the book it's based on with Robin R. Means Coleman's book, Horror Noir. And it's just such an interesting way to think about Black people and horror, and like what Ifan you were talking about, like the Hellraiser days in the 80s, where it was just like Black people die first, like that. I remember joking about that with my friends. Like you watch a movie and you're like, oh yeah, Black people always die first.
And now it's a trope, right? Now you see it like it's like you expect it, so people use that as a device almost to like trick you into those kinds of situations. It's funny.
Yeah, and now it can be completely subverted. I feel like, you know, we're living in that post Get Out, post Jordan Peele world now, where now it's become a thing. We were talking a little bit before what the future of Black horror is. I have been working on a thing called 31 Days of Black Horror on Instagram, where I've been sharing out a different Black horror film every day this month. Today I just put out His House, which is an amazing British Black horror film about Sudanese refugees who moved to England, which I just watched this morning and is amazing. My father's from Sudan, so particularly for me, it really felt like it so much. But Xavier, I want to transition over to you. I just want to give a brief rundown of your bio, just so people have a little bit more context of who you are and kind of stuff you've done. It's just the beginning, because there's a lot you've done, and I want to kind of get to it all. But
yeah, you don't need to do all of this.
Okay.
It's all good. Yeah, please don't. I'm not on that type of level. You can say like the first 2 sentences and we're good.
Emmy-nominated writer-director from USC's School of Cinematic Arts. Nurtured his process there, honing his skills as a filmmaker. Director of Shudder's first original documentary, Horror Noire. Sundance Lab Fellow. HBO finalist. Ryan Murphy Television Foundation alumni. Semi-finalist from the Student Academy Awards. And director of Emmy-nominated series Giants. And also 2018 Screencraft Drama winner.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here. We're all very excited to talk with you.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
So yeah, I think we just wanted to start off just kind of what your background was and how you got into film.
Well, the interesting thing is, like, you know, I'm from down south, like, you know, grew up beside cows, chickens, all that type of stuff between Alabama and Mississippi. And, you know, as a kid there, you know, I was writing, writing a good bit, but, you know, nobody was saying like, hey, you can go into the film industry, you can be a writer. They were like, you know, be a teacher, be an engineer, be a, you know, doctor, anything of that degree. And, you know, I'd always done good with school and stuff like that, but it wasn't until I got into Alabama at their school when I did this class called, you know, make a movie, like, you know, at the end of my sophomore year, and dude just threw his camera and said, go make something terrible. We made something horrible. It was bad, but it helped me to understand this is something that I want to focus in on. And then from there, from Alabama, I went to SC, and I've just been working ever since. So, you know, that's specifically how I got into film overall. As for horror, I mean, I think one of the things about horror is that it's ubiquitous, that you have to quite literally run away from horror in general, not to see it or not for it to imbibe it in some way. And for me as a child, the horror I remember, first and foremost, was back in 1997. It was called Event Horizon. It had Lawrence Fishburne in it. Scared the shit out of me as a kid. I should not have watched that. But really, really loved that it was Lawrence Fishburne as this commanding, honest, caring captain who was trying to do the right thing. And that always kind of like stuck with me. And I think that's why I've always loved, you know, fantasy and horror and sci-fi things to that degree, because the first thing I remember was this pop cult, you know, sci-fi horror film, which, you know, when you think about it, it's like, it's not uncommon, but it's not like something you see on a regular basis, especially not now, honestly, other than maybe like the Alien franchise or the offshoots of that. So that's what I think about as a kid, and remembering this and what's like kept with me, you know, and why I actually love horror. So, yeah.
I think we all have that movie that we saw too young that like, for me, it was 1994. It was the movie Wolf with Jack Nicholson, which barely anybody remembers.
No, I know that movie.
Yeah.
It wasn't scary though. I mean, was that horror? All right.
Oh, when I don't remember how old I was. I was like 6 or something, and I was over at my best friend's house, and his mom was watching it. You remember when people had televisions in their kitchen, like tiny little ones? Like, it was a white family, but they had like a tiny little television, and she was watching it, And there's a scene where Jack Nicholson is in the bathroom and he's peeing, and he looks into his jacket pocket and he pulls out this dude's 2 fingers that he ripped off last night when he was a werewolf. And seeing it as a kid, I was terrified.
That messed you up.
Yeah, that messed me up. Well, especially like it's one of those horror films that is mostly white people, but the only black people in that film are he goes to Central Park at night and there's like a black gang there. And like I just remember those, those were the roles that I saw in the early 90s.
Thriller was the one that scared me, and that was
Which one?
Thriller, Michael Jackson. That freaked me out.
Yeah, I was just trying to think of the first sort of black horror film or black horror sort of television film experience that I had, and Thriller was definitely it. Like I was trying to figure out the first story that I saw that was scary that had a black character, and Michael Jackson was black back then, so he was more or less, so it counted. And I remember being scared of that too, for sure.
Just to add, I think I wouldn't be surprised if Thriller, for a lot of people, without realizing it, was their introduction to black horror in general, without knowing it, because again, it was such a ubiquitous thing. Yeah. And to this day, it still is ubiquitous. So honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of folks, look at that and say, yeah, that was really my first introduction, again, without even realizing it. Though I'm sure it's not for us, that may not be it, but for others, it probably is.
Yeah, it's an interesting case because Thriller is like, and it's a question I wanted to ask you, Xavier, is, what constitutes black horror? Does Michael Jackson's participation as a black man at the time constitute a black horror story, or is there more to it than that?
So first thing, here's what I'll say. In terms of overall with, black understood black horror and all that type of stuff, I'll always, want to say like the 3 top minds for it before me is, again, Ashley Blackwood, Tanana Reed, and Dr. Robert Armin Coleman. They have done so much work in it, and I gotta give them their props first and foremost. Like, I bow my heads to them, and I'm so happy they were with me throughout this entire thing as we were building it out. Now, with what you're saying, I think, for me specifically with black horror, I do think black horror is anything that features us, like 100%. But with the understanding that as you get more into it, there is this idea of like, there has to be some context or cultural meaning to why that person is in there or what it is. So like you look at the 80s and like us, that's when the whole idea of the black person dying first, came out. But we had specific films, and it also dealt with the fact of, white people having white flight from the urban areas to the suburbs, which is why so many of the 80s films were just placed in the suburbs. So that speaks to that. And when you see black folks dying in those 80s films, that's how it, there for me, becomes more understanding of black horror. And then of course there are films like Get Out or Ganja and Hess or anything like that, where it's specifically speaking to a certain problem and or, discussion that we as black folks, have. And I think that makes it even more a part of black horror and more important in a sense. But, again, even seeing, LL Cool J in Deep Blue Sea, technically, that's black horror. It is. It's hilarious. And, I need to go back and watch that film. But it's something to bring up, though I wouldn't consider it as important, for example, as a Get Out or a Blackula. But it does have its place because, back in the 90s, there was that huge influx of just randomly seeing rappers just in horror movies. That's a whole nother thing to talk about. But yeah, I definitely think Thriller is a part of black horror. I think it's actually pretty intrinsic, and just because of how big and how important it was, 100%.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Because even the song Thriller, it's not horror, it's thriller. Like he's kind of even changing the context of it. Thriller films were kind of on the come up, and the idea of horror itself is like monsters were coming away. And I feel like he kind of changed the dynamic about that in the 80s in an interesting way. But it also is, I don't know if people know Ghost, Michael Jackson's Ghost, the other music video long film that he made, where he literally plays a white man in it. He plays the mayor of a white town. It's from like 1990.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's from the early 90s. So it was one of those I watched and I was like, is this going to make my list? And then watching it again, I was like, this is late Michael Jackson after the nose job, after the whitened skin, and it's a very different person. But like Thriller is very informed by very informed by white culture. Right. He's wearing that kind of like that shirt with the Letterman jacket, and everybody's got their hair done in that kind of white style. But I think just intrinsically because he did it as a black man at the time, like it seems like it kind of counts and kind of changed the conversation.
Well, I think it matters very much because of the fact that during the 80s, since we just got erased, like either we were the one friend in the suburbs, and then of course we get killed, or we were the friend. It reminds me of what Rachel True said in our documentary. She's like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And that's basically what her role was in the craft, you know, and a lot of times making sure that the secondary character, the more quote unquote important white characters is fine. And I bring that up to say, you know, for the 80s specifically, because we were gone, because we weren't the face, because we weren't represented in the same way, like he actually picked up perfect time for Thriller to just be out there, because it just, if even though the Blaxploitation era was not great for representation, if we were still represented on that same level in the 80s, then Thriller, while I still think would have been ubiquitous as an important, probably wouldn't have had as huge of the impact, because he basically filled up a vacuum that I think a lot of folks didn't even know was existent to a degree.
In the craft in particular, and if I remember the story correctly, the craft actually used racial identity as a plot element in that particular story, or as a device. And I don't remember exactly the context, but I know it had to do with the hair. And there was a scene where her character was being sort of
bullied.
Yeah, bullied in a certain way.
Well, the white character said something very insulting to her about her hair.
Right,
and then
right.
She manifested some results.
Right, and I remember that scene, and I was as a younger person, and I remember it had an effect on me that kind of surprised me. What do you think? What was the idea? Like, how did that? Knowing how crafted storytelling is, knowing how how did that scene get in there? I guess. How did that come about, do you think, if you had to guess?
Well, I mean, the whole thing is Rachel actually, she talked about it a little bit afterwards of after Hard Noir 2, where she just, you know, she brought up the fact that, you know, the producers and everybody who created the craft, you know, as they were trying to figure out what each girl should be their main problem. And I don't remember the other girls, but they specifically said, yo, hey, for Rachel, it should be racism. And it's like, Jesus fucking Christ! Like, can't it just be something a little bit? Why it's like, oh, here's a nigger. That one should be like Jesus Christ. And it's weird, because I am thankful that we have that depiction on screen, but at the same time, it's like, Jesus fucking Christ.
Right.
Why can't this young black girl just have a non-racist based problem? Like, you know, that can happen to us too. So it's like a fucking double-edged sword.
The idea of like politicizing art why does black art need to be inherently political? You know, and I think that the representation that there's a tremendous opportunity with the writers of that story to do something that was more fundamental to the genre itself than to be established, than to use as a device to promote, I guess, ironically, our fears about race. Like that's interesting, I find. I mean,
what you bring up, and it's something I said before, sometimes it's actually more important to just see black folks having fun and just enjoying themselves than to see another film about our plight. Like, you know, it sounds, again, some people might find it weird, but it's like, if I have to choose between a film about us, and it's in the 60s, and we're getting beat and lynched and kicked and maimed and all that shit, and then you say, well, you can either watch that, or you can watch this really fun romantic comedy where these two black folks, you know, fall in love and do quirky shit. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with either one in choosing that, but I think there's a good amount of niggas that are just like, hey, I don't want to watch that right now. And it's not to say that it shouldn't exist, right, but it's like, how many more times do we have to rewatch ourselves go through that, honestly? It's a double-edged sword. It's really, really interesting with our stories. And I think, but to what you're saying, and that's something I think that's a good rebuttal to tell Black creators and Black filmmakers, that literally just having us doing normal shit is within itself a statement. And it's a good statement. And you don't have to feel this need for every single thing that you write or do to have this deeper sociological meaning. It doesn't have to be like that. We don't expect white folks to constantly, they don't do that. They just don't. So, why are we putting ourselves on the same? And I get it, because it's like, we feel this obligation to our people. But at the same time, it's like you need to feel an obligation to yourself and just tell the stories that you want to tell. And I think inherently, if you do that and just having Black people in it is going to be enough than feeling like you have to go into the social issue, social justice side.
Yeah.
Well, I want to get into then why was it for you to make horror noir? Like, to have something that is full of social commentary? Like, what specifically drew you into that project?
Got you. And let me answer that, and then after that, Shonda, I want to hear what you were about to say. So for me specifically, I think in this instance, and why it mattered, is one, it's something I've said this literally in every single sit down I've had with this, because I always want to make it clear that the gestation of horror noir did not start with me. It started with Dr. Robin Coleman's book. Then Ashley Blackwell said, yo, I want to put this together. They talked to Stage 3. Stage 3 brought it to Shudder. Shudder, was like back and forth. Then Jordan won the Oscar. And then that's when they said, oh, this is a thing. We should pay attention. And that's where we need a young, chipper, Black filmmaker who understands this world to come in and, build this out with us. And that's when I came into this. So I say all that to say, the gestation of why this was made and how it got started does not start with me. I absolutely do not want to take that credit from the Black women who were specifically the ones who got it all together, first and foremost. So with that understanding, I think what separates it is the fact that horror noir, there's literally nothing else like it. There is no other documentary or place to go to in a concentrated effort that talks about our history from the 1900s to today, specifically in horror. It's so niche and specific that I think there's a necessity of it, because without it, there's a lot of folks. And again, when I think about horror, these are the two folks I care about. Black folks and then horror fans. That's what I care about first and foremost. Everyone else, I don't give a shit about. Those are my two most important things when it comes to this goddamn film. And I reason why I'm even saying this is because I had something else happen just literally like 2 days ago that made me really, really pissed off about horror noir. And I can talk about that later. But I'm saying that all to say that because it was an area that we had no history, we had history on, but it hadn't been talked about in this type of manner. That's why I think in this instance, it was a necessity. Because I think there's a difference between you have a documentary that deals with, social justice, it deals with let's say 1960 civil rights. I'm always going to tell you that documentary matters, but at the same time, we do have a lot of documentaries that deal with it. We can always use more. I never want to take that away at all. But I think in this instance, because this was so niche and we hadn't heard about it before, that's what made it the necessity. But then I also agree with you that if someone says, yo, that choose between horror noir and the romantic comedy, I'm not going to be mad at them if they choose one over the other based on what they want to talk about and what they want to see. And just to add, Rashana, what were you about to bring in?
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you and Ifani were talking about, with the craft, and then also the commentary around, having films about Black joy, and then the other, the other side of the other, just the other end. Obviously, Black joy is very important, or just Black normalization in shows is very important. And Jeff and I also, not just Jeff and I with Lovecraft Country being out recently, there has been I feel like a lot of conversation around those two specific topics. Here's this show, which is doing a lot of different things. People are very engaged with it. People like it. People don't like it. It's a lot, it's this, please correct me if I'm wrong, it was a book written by a white author, but I think now the writer is a Black woman who's...
Is Misha green from underground, I think.
Yeah, so like, you know, she's trying to take it back or something. I don't want to put words in her mouth. But watching it, I watched like the first 4 episodes. All I felt like is I'm just rewatching more Black trauma, and for why, you know what I'm saying? Like, I know people bring up, oh, it's the Jim Crow era, blah, blah, blah. Sure. But there's like so many other tropes and things about it that I feel like are not even progressing the story. And obviously I cannot speak to what life was like in the Jim Crow, but I don't feel like every Black person was going through so many traumatic experience like this on an everyday basis. I could be completely wrong. On the other end too, having films that, you know, show us in happier situations, or yes, we're having trauma, but it's not necessarily the direct motivation of the story, is great. It's helpful. It's nice. Also, I've seen a lot of not so good rom-coms that push a different type of trope, you know, and such as well. So, you know, I say all this to say, like, you know, it would be great when Black people can just have more balance in what we want to put out. Well, actually, I shouldn't say it like that, because with the internet, there is a lot more access and balance. But in the mainstream side of it, it would be great to see that balance reflected as well, because it gives us more options, and we're creating consistently. That's something that we don't ever stop doing. So like, you know, instead of just trying to support us to make it a trend, like just straight up support us, because there's so much, you know, out here. There's so much to be expressed. And yeah, with the craft, more specifically, it was interesting, and it is a double-edged sword, because the way she gets back at the white character, like, you do feel some vindication. But then when you hear the backstory of why, and that she had to be a little more political, yeah, it does become kind of weird, you know, like, you know, this all hindsight stuff. This is all the stuff you know later in life. But when you're young and watching this, you're just like, cool, you know, and we all know worse things can happen to Black characters, you know, in film. So yeah, that's all I want to say about that right now.
No, I think Rashonda brings up a really good point, and I think it's about how our genre is defined, and as Black people, is there an opportunity or a responsibility to redefine, operate within a certain set of parameters, or destroy it all together? Like, it is about participation, but it's also about creating something new. And with that, I'll ask a question. And it definitely relates to what we're talking about, but do across culture, across race in this world, like, is fear, which has a certain connection to horror in the genre, like there's an element of fear that's associated with horror, obviously. Do people on a fundamental level, do we, as people who populate this planet, do we fear the same things? Or do we fear the same things on a different level? And based on that, is there an opportunity to create something new, or are we working with something that is fundamental?
I mean, it's an interesting question. So, and anyone please pipe up if you feel like it.
It's already
when I think about what you're bringing up, the first thing that pops into me is, again, we go back to America and how it's set up. And my first answer is like, you know, yes, we completely have these different understandings of fear and what it feeds into. Because again, we bring up how, like, again, with white folks in the horror films they make, when they have to think about fear, they have to make up. Now, of course, these monsters always come back to us, Native Americans. It can always be brought back to a fear of the others, which tends to be us, you know, for the most part. But we see them constantly. We see King Kong. We see the black. The men from the lagoon. We see Ngagi. We see so many of these monsters that are created for them to be scared of, because they need something to be scared of, because the average white American isn't going to actually have something truly that is oppressive against them, that's going to keep them scared and awake on a constant basis. Like, of course, they try to manufacture things like, you know, being scared of us or Muslims or things to that degree, you know, and that, you know, speaks to white supremacy, you know, within our nation. But then you flip it to us. Well, white folks do not have a specific thing they can say, this is the problem. We do. We can talk about voter suppression. We can talk about us getting lynched in the goddamn streets. We can talk about us getting strung up. Like, literally, there are actual tangible things that we can touch and show that we intrinsically fear. So I 100% think that that demarcation is true. They're completely different. Now, is it to say as a human being, can all human beings be scared of the same thing? Sure, if they're put into the same situation or same overall fundamental understandings. But it's just
sympathy.
Yeah, of course. Right. With that, of course. But it's like in practice, it's like just the mere understanding of oppression that we all know means that what we fear and what white folk fear is always just going to be fundamentally different. Now, can there be intersections? I think sure, but they're not going to be as prevalent. So I hope that answers what you brought up.
Oh, definitely. No, go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think Get Out, that's why it kind of blows my mind that movie got so big, because in that movie, it's white liberalism that is the monster. And so I'm kind of confused how that movie blew up as big as it did, because
how the fuck did they even make it?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, holy shit. The white liberals were like, yo, we like this. And it's like, really? Like, wow.
Talking about microaggression.
And white liberals like to make money too, so.
Yeah, but
very fair.
It was this sort of cross-cultural thing that people could watch it and see and finally understand to a lesser degree, but understand on a cinematic way, like, oh, you're afraid of this. Oh, this is.
But let's take it a step back. For us, Get Out, love Get Out. There are parts in it that for we as Black people, and this is nothing wrong with the storytelling, that it's blatant. It's obvious what's happening. I think, two scenes that always come to mind is the auction scene and the scene when the lights for Homeboy come up at the end. And, the wife was like, oh, they're safe, police. And we're like, oh, fuck police. Two different understandings there. But what you're bringing up with, white folks being able to finally understand it. One thing, when it comes to hard on Black heart, it doesn't matter what they think. It doesn't matter whether or not they understand it or not. It's for us first and foremost. But if we have to talk about it, it's one thing I remember is something one of my friends told me, where they brought their white, very suburban mom to see Get Out. And she enjoyed it.
Oh!
Apparently, she enjoyed it.
That in itself is scary.
But here's the thing that was crazy. She got out, and she was like, I loved it. It was really, really good. But I didn't understand that whole scene where they were holding up their hands and doing this, and everybody was quiet. What was going on? And her daughter, who is far more learned about this stuff, had to tell her they were doing, an auction. It was a slavery. And the lady was like, oh my God, I can't believe that's what I watched. And it's like, it's so obvious. But for her, and her upbringing, where she was from, what she was taught, it just wasn't there. It completely flew over her head. And I was like, holy shit, how does that scene of all the things go over your, but apparently it did.
I got to come up off something because along these lines, because I got to be honest, I wasn't a huge fan of Get Out. In fact, I was somewhat disappointed by the story. However, the scariest part of that film for me, and I was the first 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. The first 5 minutes of this Black man walking down the street at night and a car rolls up. Mm-hmm. And you're in a neighborhood where you don't know where you're at. Well, you know where you're at, but it's a white neighborhood. In fact, when I saw that scene, I recalled in my own mind a very similar point in time in my life where I felt
you had a memory life.
Like I've been there. Like I've been where that man was in a lot of different ways. In that first 5 minutes, I remember and it keyed into something that attacked, that associated with me as a Black person. Mm-hmm. So that scene was designed for me, to make me scared based on my own personal experience, whether that be good or bad. We can talk about whether or not I should be afraid to walk in a white neighborhood at night. But the reality is, walking in a white neighborhood at night as a 6'7" tall Black man, that's me, not necessarily the character, is a scary thought. And the fact that other people who are watching that, whether they be of a different cultural background, whether they be white or whoever, aren't going to feel as afraid. I think there are some universal signs, because it's dark and you maybe don't know where you're going, that are a certain level of fear, but there's a heightened level of fear for me. And I felt that I didn't feel that at the moment, I just felt scared. But as the movie went on and I felt less scared, I started to remember that was the part that I was scared at, and that's what made it stand out. And so the rest of it being, you know, very specific and very sort of overt, like I got all those symbols. That one was like tailor-made. I never had that experience before in my life.
That's so interesting. That's really interesting. The reason why I find it fascinating is because one of the things that I felt Black horror is really gonna have to jump into is the idea that Black horror isn't always meant to be, you know, boo jump scare in your face. And Black horror is gonna have to really lean into not being scared of the thing right in front of you, but scared of the entire situation that you're in at that point in time within the film. And I think that's something that you're right, that top scene does very, very well. And I think the rest of Get Out, the rest of the film really feels more into, you're not supposed to be screaming out of your seat like you are in a Descent or a Conjuring, but the overall understanding what's happening here should terrify you. And I've noticed, I feel like that's a thing that, you know, people going into Black horror kind of need to understand. And it's weird to say this, that it's a horror film, but you shouldn't expect yourself to go like, all the time. It shouldn't be that so much as it should be understanding implicitly why this overall scenario is terrifying for the people who are these people and also for the people who they represent. And I feel like that's something that's going to have to, it's weird in the sense that I think when it comes to Black horror and as things go out, that I don't know if it's possible or not, but more audiences just need to be keyed in to the idea that when you're watching these specific type of films, that if you come in with the expectation that you're supposed to get scared constantly like you do with a regular mainstream horror, you're actually going, and I'm not saying this is you, I'm just saying in general, that you're going to end up having a bad time because you're not coming into this with the right understanding of what you should get out of it. But I do admit there's also the other side of it. It's like a film is a film. You should be able to go in and enjoy it without context regardless. And that's fair to a degree, but I think there's two sides to that.
Well, it's interesting, especially with something like Bad Hair that just came out, which is, Xavier, we talked about, you've seen, Rashonda saw. It's trying to be very culturally specific. It's set in the late 80s. It's like New Jack Swing. It's talking about the television industry. And then it's getting very specifically into like hair, natural, or like, do you want to be more like these white people who are successful? And so it's interesting for an audience. I'm wondering how it, you know, we're talking about like mostly talking about the Black, the diaspora, how it responds with them. But I'm wondering just overall, you know, if a Native American person sees it, if, you know, how that is going to translate. Like, are there other cultural touchstones that kind of work?
Yeah, and is that perspective necessary? Do we want to know? Do we care? Is it important? I'm curious. You know.
Well, that's what I'm fascinated if it does.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
Important. Go ahead. It's important in some contexts because you kind of, I think we're all a little naturally curious of what people think, and not in that way where like it's going to affect your day to day, but you're like, you know, just kind of curious. You watch this thing and you know how you felt about it. What do they think about it? How did they, not even what they think, how did they digest it and receive it? You know, like that would be kind of my more, where my curiosity goes. But I know that one of the other things I really liked about the movie, outside of just the horror context, I felt like they were really good with the aesthetics of the look of it too, to help like really get you into the feeling and the vibe of what is, you know.
Talking about Get Out, or are we talking about Bad Hair?
Bad Hair.
I didn't see
they were really good with the aesthetics. The look.
Yeah, I definitely have to say, like, one thing I really loved about it is that, you know, Justin fully committed to making sure that bad boy looked like it was from like the 80s. Like, you know, for real. It felt that way in how they were dressed and how everything looked and the choice shot that he chose. It was, I mean, yeah, like that overall aesthetic was nice. I also, you know, there was a couple of times where I wondered, like, and again, I could be wrong, but I was like, was this shot on film? Because, you know, I know that film can give off more of that older type feel to it, and it definitely, I think it was shot on.
It was shot on 16 millimeter. And
okay, that makes sense. That actually honestly makes sense why it has the overall look. And I think that was actually a very, very smart idea. Like, you know, you can talk about the cultural context of Bad Hair, but, you know, just on a technical level, I liked it. It was something. I can say that.
Yeah. I think they did They showed on 60 millimeter. I was listening to an interview with Justin, and he talked about why the choices he made, that before it was set in modern times, but then he pushed it back to have this crossover of new Jack Swing and these black artists kind of coming up right before they got cut off by all these kind of mid 90s Britney Spears, kind of these white artists came back in. So this time where there was this amazing independence of black artists. So it was interesting to hear that, and then did a lot of practical effects with it that were kind of covered by shooting on the 16 millimeter. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting film in the context because it's coming post horror noir, post Get Out, because there are big questions asked now of the film that is written by a black man, but it's kind of the perspective of a black woman and specifically her hair. So me as somebody who has kind of never went through the experience of having a hot comb or these sort of things, it's kind of like bringing me in a little bit, but I'm interested, and I've heard from talking to one of our fellows about it, and she was just like, hard pass, not gonna get into it. So I think it's interesting how specifically black horror is getting into, you know, I come from a kind of an African background, so I've African American experiences somehow, some of it is different from me because
let's just add to that. I mean, to be completely honest, when it comes to bad hair, you said the African American experience. To be honest with you, for me personally, the reason why I hesitate to talk much about bad hair is because I feel like it's and again, this is just also from experience of me just learning that this is a territory to listen to black women and hear what they have to say on this. And I'm trying my best not to, like, you know, jump full head into this motherfucker and say shit that I don't know the fuck what I'm saying. Which is why, like, while I'm willing to talk about the technical stuff, I'm willing to get to that. On the cultural side, it's like I almost feel like maybe it isn't my place to be the person that's the loudest or the talking the most about this, because again, it's such a niche experience that harbors specifically on black women in their hair, and it's like us as black men, we don't know that shit.
And I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I'm also not gonna act like I am the, like, you know, the representative for all black women. I only can speak for myself, to be for real. But also, like, you know, in support of different opinions. I really like the movie. I'm not really about to get super deep into it, but I will say the ending is really what sealed it for me. Like, there were some moments.
Don't give it away.
Sure, I'm not about to give away the ending. I was just gonna say there are some moments for sure within the film, you know, it definitely raised my eyebrow, but like, yeah, the way they tied it all up and put that there, I was like, I'm here for this.
I want to switch gears real quick because I had a question that popped up about, I know we don't have too much time left. We got about 10 so minutes, but I wanted to talk about the role of comedy in black horror, because I feel like there's a lot of, we have a filmmaker here, a brother who's part of the filmmaking community. His name is Ime Etuk, and he worked on Tales from the Hood back in the day. I know they're working on making another Tales from the Hood that's coming out pretty soon, but there's a very clear intersection of these tropes and these fears of sort of white America that I feel like Black American, both comedians and auteurs, capitalize on to create almost a different genre. I think of, like, the Wayans brothers and the scary movie films. I think of like, Vampire in Brooklyn, all these films that kind of toe the line between horror and comedy. And I wonder if you have anything to say about how that converges for Black creators.
Oh, I got a lot to say. It's the yes. Thank you for bringing this up. It's the Black comedy horror, which is, again, its own genre. And literally, just in my own work with what I do with me and my writing partner, I can't tell you how many times in the last script that we wrote that we're still working on it, it's been getting attention and stuff like that. But the main note we've gotten from, white executives has been tone down the funny. Like, this is a horror film. Why are there so many laughs in it? And, of course, me and him were like, fuck that shit. We kept in our jokes. Fuck that bullshit. But it was just the fact that for these execs, the idea that horror could have some light comedy to it. Because again, for us, sometimes I can't tell you how many times I'll see something and it's racist. And it's like, that's super fucked up. but it's a little funny. Sometimes it can be a little funny, but it's just so goddamn racist. It puts on the caricature.
Right.
And it's like, this is hilarious, even though it is still fucking terrifying. And I feel like that can come into our work, and we can talk about it. And there are parts where just on a horror level, when you really think about it, this shit is kind of funny sometimes. And it's okay to laugh at that and bring it up. I think Get Out, again, did a great job of bringing that in there. And I think Get Out was, even though there's been other ones that have done it, and you brought up some before, it was the first time where folks kind of realized, like, you can blend these two, and that's okay. That also speaks to the fact that Jordan Peele was a comedian himself and has worked in there so long. But even within the industry right now, there's still pushback to that, because they still don't intrinsically understand that for us, a part of our horror is bringing in the comedic nature of the shit that we go through. Like that's a piece of it. We've had our comedians have constantly, that's been a whole part of their bit, how fucked up shit is for us. So the idea that that's not going to come through in our work and in our heart, it doesn't make any sense. But that's still a fighting point because they don't fully understand it. And I bring that up to say that I still think a lot of, especially the white execs, still don't intrinsically understand what make Get Out good. You know, overall. Now, here's the thing. Everything's, hindsight 2020. We like, oh, we knew it was always going to be amazing right now. It's like, I get it. It's unfair to say that to a degree, but at the same time, there are just some intrinsic things in there in this successful Black horror that I still think the higher-ups, and I mean the high-ups, the folks who can actually get things made where they can say, here's 10, here's 5, and you can go make it, they still don't understand the necessity of it because that demographic is still majority white, male, old, rich. So intrinsically, there's some shit about our art, not just horror, but in general, that they don't inherently get. And because horror, mainstream horror, has always been like a Descent, it's always been a Conjuring, it's always been an Exorcist. Even those things have gotten spoofed like crazy when they were made. It's like this was supposed to be sort of just straight horror. Nothing is funny about this shit. And in reality, there's funny shit. I'll even add this and then we can move on. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Okay, folks put it up as super scary and frightening them and shit. I watched that thing. That goddamn movie's funny to me. Like, it's actually kind of hilarious. Like really unintentionally funny. And it's like, this is supposed to be Stanley Kubrick movie. Why am I laughing? But there is some really, really funny over-the-top parts to it. And I feel like Stanley was probably not trying to make that funny at all. But there's just something inherent there. And I think a lot of execs within the industry still don't understand what it means to have comedy as a piece of your horror, and that actually accentuates it.
Interesting.
I'd like to interject right quick. I mean, to that point, I think that's what we do though in general. Like, we often write very cross-genre type work, and then it gets, changed, distilled, whatever, by these execs, all of that. So yeah, to your point, like, I'm not saying everything we make is funny, but also I have most of, like, Black people love to laugh. So I just don't know when we're not going to find a moment of humor, even in films that are supposed to be more serious. There's still gonna be little moments. So like, I think it's like what we've been saying the whole time, just let us create, let us do this whole, let us make our art in our own way instead of you trying to get it and therefore fund it based off of that. Nah, yeah. Just let us do it.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Let us fail. It's weird to say that, but it's like, let us make a whole bunch of crazy shit like you let so many of our white counterparts. And some are gonna be amazing, some aren't. And that's okay. Like, it goes back to that overall understanding of why do our films have to be representative of all the Black films? Because it feels like whenever our films fail, that is a failure of Black art in general. And that's not something that white artists have to think about when they make their shit. They don't. And honestly, it's frustrating, and we need to get to the point, and it's something that I've seen folks say a lot. It's like, we should be allowed to make mediocre films too, in the sense that we should be able to make a film that's just okay. Yep. And that isn't going to mean we'll never make a film again, because feels it very much is that. If we as Black folks, we as Black artists, and also women artists as well, if you make a bad film and or a mediocre film, that could be the end of your career. Whereas our white male counterparts, they can very much fail upwards.
Churn out crap at huge peak levels.
Yeah, and very high levels when it's like, oh my God, how I think again,
just log into one of your streaming services and you'll just see pages and pages of the shit.
Yeah. There's one film on Netflix, and I'm not gonna say its name because I'm not a fan of like openly shitting on anybody's work. I try my best not to do that. But I looked it up. They made it. I'm impressed with them because they made it for like $100K and it got on Netflix. So that means they got their stuff back. But it is quite literally, it's a horror film. It is one of the worst horror films I've ever seen. Everything about it. And it's not even like B movie. They know it's so bad and they know that so they're trying to make it.
They're making effort.
They're really making effort, and the effort is making shit. And it's amazing to see it, but it's so bad. And it's like, I can't believe I looked up and saw that thing on Netflix when there's so many of us who are just, we are just trying our hardest to get our show to ground. If someone came to us and said, here's $50,000, go make a feature, I think most of us would be willing to take that shit.
Yeah.
Because it's just so hard to get money in general. But then you see that one, 100K, one of the worst movies I've ever seen in terms of horror. It's just bad in general. But that person is gonna keep making movies, and a lot of them, I'm sure. And it's just, it's one of those things that we just have to deal with as Black artists. Like there's always that chance that you make your first feature and that's your last feature. And it's like, Jesus Christ, I don't know. It's just fucking scary.
Well, as we're wrapping up, I wanted to ask you for our fellows, like so you've made horror noir. It's been a hit in the horror industry, and like people are watching it. Do you have any kind of recommendations or tips for people who are writing, especially our fellows? We have 6 fellows who are working on very different projects, like musicals, not specifically horror, some different genre stuff. Is there anything you'd want to say to them?
Here's the tip I can give you. Like, and this sounds crazy, but I just want to say this, and I really want to say this. Like, whatever off the wall, crazy, weird, fucked up idea you got, fucking run with it. Literally, one of my jobs is, and I do this, behind the scenes, is I work with a lot of companies and execs to, one, do a shit ton of coverage on scripts, and then watch a shit ton of stuff on a regular basis to give thoughts, breakdowns, and stuff like that. And it comes from all demographics, but you're still majority white, of course, unfortunately. But when I say some of the shit I see, and it's like, oh my God, this is actually going to get greenlit. And some of it is going to be amazing. Some of it's like, you don't deserve to ever make a film. And I am so mad that they're even doing this with you. Like, that's how bad it is. And I bring this up to say that whatever you're making, if go for it, run for it. Don't let anybody, and don't not let these execs say, this is a dumb idea, you shouldn't make this, you should pivot. The shit that I see on a regular basis that gets greenlit is enough for me to understand that there's a good chance that your idea is good. Like, it's very possible for it to get made. It's not a case of whether or not your idea is good or bad. It's just that you're not in the right room or have the right connections to get it off the ground. So don't allow 1,000 notes from people who aren't even going to give, or going to be willing to read it again, to make you completely pivot from your idea. When I quite literally see trust fund babies, I literally had a time, and this is one where it's like, Jesus Christ, I'm saying this, but fuck it, I'm gonna say it. Literally, the dude wrote this script, and it was the most elementary thing I've ever seen in my life. It was like on a 3rd grade level. And I honestly was like, why is this on my desk? Why am I reading it? And the exec I was working with said, can you sit down and send me like 5 or 6 pages of notes breaking down how to say this story? And in any other instance, this would have been, I grabbed this, I put it in the trash, that's it, we don't talk about it again, because it was just a bad script. But the fact that this individual was a trust fund baby with a huge parent who could throw in a lot of goddamn money, it didn't matter if his thing was bad in the first place. It was like, how do we salvage this? So I bring that all up to say that I'm not saying it's always this, but there is a chance, especially as a Black and brown filmmaker, that your idea is fine. There's nothing wrong with your idea. You don't need to do another 1,000 goddamn drafts of it. It's just a case that you haven't, unfortunately, you're not already rich and well off, and or you don't have the connections yet that can get in front of the right person who believes in this. And you just have to keep that in your head and don't let it discourage you from coming up and doing your unique idea that you haven't seen anywhere else. That's the best thing I can give.
Word up.
Thank you so much, Xavier, for talking with us. I learned a lot. This was a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking this time.
Yeah, I hope you stay with us, and maybe take some of the fellows that we're working with have some pretty good ideas, and maybe we could send a couple to you, maybe a scene or two. Let you know what we think.
Please do. Like the best thing I can, like the one thing I've always told folks, like reach out to me, talk to me. It's not hard to find me. Can I get any of your stuff off the ground? No, but I absolutely can give you notes, give you thoughts, help you out on that type of level. Don't ask me for no favor that's bigger than but anything else, I will help. So if any of them want to send something over for me to read or peep, please do. Like, if I can help, I'll try.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
All right, no problem, guys. Well, thank you guys so much for having me on this. I really appreciate it.
All right.
Great. Thank you so